Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Finchley for Wahoo's 24/7, and it's a good Monday morning because we are talking about a Virginia football win. The Cavaliers beat Old Dominion 16-14, not without some late game dramatics, but at the end of the day, they beat the Monarchs and are now 2-1 before they hit the road this week to face Syracuse for their first ACC contest. So if I could sum up this game in one sentence, it would be Virginia amassed 513 total yards of offense, scored 16 points, one touchdown. That pretty much sums up the game. When you hear that, you know already that Virginia left plenty on the field, plenty of opportunities, and plenty of points. So let's just talk an overview of some of the big keys when you talk about what we saw in this win. I think when you look at the overall picture, you see a team that has improved, not just on defense. That's something that we've talked after game 1, after game 2, and now after game 3. We have seen this defense improve week in and week out. But when you look at the offense, you also see some improvement. I know we're going to focus on a few of the things that we didn't like in that game. We're going to talk about the penalties. There were some penalties that negated some big offensive drive, some big offensive big plays. You had the John Paul Flores personal foul. They got to put him back 15 yards. You had a Grant Mish penalty. You had a Derek Devine penalty. There was a lot of opportunity squandered by UVA getting penalties. I think at the end, and let me just bring out the stats here. If you're on YouTube, you get to see the stats. Again, the stats also available on Wahoo's 24/7. Virginia had 8 penalties for 80 yards. Not great. Not great at all. But that's not all. The offense also had some issues. Again, it seems like Brennan Armstrong and some of his wide receivers aren't on the same page. In the opening drive, and we're going to talk about the play calling a little bit later, but in the opening drive, there was 2 instances where I thought the wide receivers were running the wrong route. There was one particular play that 2 wide receivers collided, Heaton Thompson and Dontavian Wicks. So there's still some element of communication or timing issues that is occurring with the wide receivers between Brennan and his receivers. So that is something that we still noticed in this game. There was also drop passes. There was a few times where like Dontavian Wicks of last year would have got that. And I know this is a new year and you don't want to keep comparing to last year, but there are some balls out there that you think that's a Wicks catchable ball. Even those 50-50 balls that you would say could have gone either way. For Wicks, those aren't 50-50 balls. If we saw last year, he's had some amazing catches. And in the beginning of the game, UVA was trying to get him going because at the end of the day, you still want to build confidence in him. And he did have some drops. So drops is still an issue with the receivers. And then, like I mentioned, wrong routes. Obviously, they had 3 turnovers, 3 fumbles on the day, 2 of them inside the 10-yard line. You're right there, ready to punch it in for a score, and you turn over the ball. That's minimum. That's 6 points. It could have been 14. So this game, although it's 16-14, it could have been worse rather early. So again, points left on the field. The other thing was substitution issues or players not paying attention to the game. Tony Elliott mentioned that there was one time where they had to find Mike Hollins for his special teams assignment. And then obviously we remember when Brendan Farrell missed his field goal. But what happened before actually is what I want to talk about, is when there was a substitution issue where Michael Diatta was not where he needed to be. So Tony Elliott essentially had to ice his own kicker and call a timeout. So that ruins the kicker's timing. So at the end, he missed this field goal. So a lot of things to clean up still. But again, you're cleaning up with the win and in a game where you did see some progress. The big thing for me is I saw a team that was willing to fight. Against Illinois, you didn't see that fight. Even though, if you look at it against Illinois, mathematically, they were still in the game quite late in the game, but they weren't in the game because of their attitude and because of their fight. It seemed like they didn't have that fight. We saw that fight against ODU. And sometimes that mental aspect is the biggest thing in a game because that's what we saw last year with Brennan Armstrong in the offense. We thought that if they had the ball, they would have the opportunity to win. And we saw that against Louisville. We saw that against Miami. We always thought that if Brennan had a chance to lead the team to a win, there would always be time on the clock for that. Against ODU, we saw that, obviously, with that last drive. So I think in that respect, that was a good thing for this offense. It was a good chance for this offense collectively to gain some confidence, to get some momentum into the season, momentum that felt like so close in so many instances against ODU. And then it would have been halted by either a penalty or a drop pass or a turnover, or it was just felt like you would get on this train and it would be like going and going and going, and then it just stopped. So this could be a big thing for UVA, especially when you have that ACC contest coming up. So let's take a look at some of the stats. We'll start off with the offense because that's obviously the biggest talking point that most people were concerned with going into this game, and obviously going into this season. There's a lot of question marks, and that's still a big question mark going forward. Brennan Armstrong finished the day throwing 20 of 37, 284 yards, no touchdowns, which it's quite remarkable. He has not scored a touchdown since that Richmond game, which is a remarkable stat when you think of it. The only touchdown against ODU was that Mike Hollins rush where Brennan Armstrong and Jonathan Leach kind of pushed Hollins over the line for that touchdown. So that is certainly a stat for Brennan not having a touchdown in 2 games. So those are Brennan, and I think he had an overall better day. Obviously, there were still a few things when you look at it where you might want to take a pass or two back. But honestly, I think he was more accurate of a passer this time, and his decision-making wasn't as glaring as against Illinois. You saw him get a little bit more confidence back. You saw him wing it and freelance more, which I think helped him gain a little bit of that confidence. We saw the Brennan of last year a little bit where he was had a little bit more moxie. He was a little more confident going outside the pocket. There was one particular play in the second half where he rolled to his left and threw to Grant Mish when he didn't have any wide receivers open. So he ad-libbed that play. You know, there was some confidence when they did the option, when instead of pitching it to Mike Collins, he saw the hole and he went for it, and he was able to get the first down. So there were some good sparks from Brennan. And honestly, some of the passes that he had were just not. Either the wide receiver didn't win his one-on-one matchups, or they ran the wrong route, or they had a drop. So there were some good things from Brennan. This was a good game for Brennan Armstrong to slowly gain on his confidence. Yes, he turned over the ball twice, and we're going to touch on those in just a bit. But it was an overall better game for him. As far as rushing, they were able to pick up 229 yards rushing, 284 yards passing. Again, trying to get that offense pretty balanced. Unlike last week where they were 0 of 15, 1 of 16 because of a defensive holding call. So that's why they got a conversion on third down last week. There were 7 of 16 on third down. So a little bit better on that front against the Monarchs. Obviously, if you look at the leading rusher, you're going to see first-year Xavier Brown, and we're going to talk to him about him a little bit more. But man, he's going to have an exciting career at Virginia. He had 88 yards in the win after 9 carries, averaging 9.8 yards. And again, we're going to talk about Xavier a little bit later on the show, but a lot of good things we're seeing from him. So we were able to see a new face in the running game for Virginia. And then as far as in the receiving group, it was good to see Dontavian Wicks get a few catches. He had 4 catches for 85 yards. His completion rate was his reception rate was 29%. So again, he still had a few drops there. But I think the main story when you look at this receiving group is Heaton Thompson. He had a catch percentage of 64%. He had 9 catches for 118 yards, averaging 13.1 yards. Obviously, everyone remembers that acrobatic, crucial circus catch in the third down. But he was just so consistent and so reliable. And we knew that going into the season that Heaton would be a key part of this offense. And I guess ODU, we saw that. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're just kind of doing the overview of the offensive stats. So those are the key things from the game offensively as far as stats. And what I liked about this game is, after last game, yes, they hurt themselves. Yes, there were some questionable things with some decisions, but they played better, more confidently at times, especially with that last drive. But also, I really liked a lot of what Coach Des Kitchings did in this game. He got a lot of attention after the Illinois game, schematically, because the O-line was left a little more vulnerable. I think this time the coaches and along with Brennan were able to disguise some of the issues on the O-line. I think there's still some issues. I'm not going to say the O-line is fantastic world beaters just yet. You have to look at who they're facing. You can't compare what they faced to Illinois and what they faced against Old Dominion. Don't get me wrong. That defensive front from ODU did some great things against Virginia, but they also, when you look at their strength and their weakness, they were also coming into this game not great against the run. So that's why we saw a little more success on the ground game for Virginia. But what Coach Kitchings and UVA did was schematically better. They had pitches, they had jet sweeps, they had game plans that helped disguise the O-line issues. Did they still have problems snapping the ball? Yes. Whether it was Ty Furnish or Justice Johnson under center, they still had issues snapping the ball. There were still some high snaps. They need to get it to his chest level. That is something that needs to be worked on and changed. That is true. But they were able to disguise that O-line deficiency on a lot of ways. They were better on the O-line. There was a lot of notable times when the O-line were held their blocks well so that guys were able to get the extra yard or two, or Brennan was able to get more time get more time. And then that's the reason why he was more accurate, because he did have more time and the plays were able to actually come about. But also having Heaton Thompson in there and more of that kind of, he had more motions. They were using him more in creative ways. And it was kind of like more of a tight end road. They don't have Lonnie Woods. They don't have that big monster presence. But he was kind of used in that way, which I think was a very smart decision. Used him in the jet sweep. And those are ways to help your O-line out. And also what I really liked is it also simplified the offense. If you go back and watch film, they ran the few same plays, but they just ran them in different formations. So they would have 11 personnel out, but then they would have one back and one tight end. And then they had 12 personnels and had one back and two tight ends, and they ran counters. And it just helped the O-line protect Armstrong because they had more bodies out there. They had more guys helping. And I think that helped this offense get confidence. Again, you're looking at the opponent and where they stand as far as your other opponents down the road, how they are they as competitive as some of the other guys? Are they talent level? Are we just overthinking this? Are we overanalyzing that, saying they're better? No. Yes, you always have to compare talent level, but at the same time, when you're grading out a game like this, you have to look at, are they adapting to their competition? And they are. Again, when we talked about the predictions for this game, when I wrote about my 5 predictions for the game, one of the things I said was UVA was going to establish the run because ODU allowed big plays on the ground against ECU. That was an obvious area where UVA could exploit, and UVA did. That is what you want. So when you looked at film, you realize, okay, ODU couldn't stop ECU's run. So UVA said, that's where we can attack. And that's what they did. But Mike Collins and Xavier Brown were two backs that were very successful. And then obviously Brennan Armstrong was also able to use his legs. So they executed the game plan well. And honestly, I know some people are going to say, yeah, but they still threw deep when they started the game. I'm perfectly fine with that. When you want an offense to show that aggression, that killer instinct, what a best way to do that than try to go deep route. It's still 0-0. I'm fine if they did that. And they were trying to get Wicks and Brennan on the same page. So I wasn't I was fine with that to start the game with those deep routes because Tony Elliott mentioned this. With this team, he needs to show that aggressiveness. That is something that he's noticed over the course of the game because he's trying to get these guys in it for 4 quarters. If you remember last year, I was talking about that too. I was talking about how this team wasn't consistent through 4 quarters. It seemed like they weren't mentally there the whole time or playing with that same aggression. This is how Tony Elliott and his staff have identified a way to do it. Show they're being aggressive. When at the end of the first half, he did something he learned from the first game against Richmond. He was calling timeouts because he wanted his team to get the ball back so that he can score because they knew ODU was going to get the ball back in the second half. He also said to his players, if we win the toss, I am going to ask for the ball first because I want to show ODU and I want to show you guys that we're going to be aggressive. So again, I didn't mind that so much. I mind that when you have a defensive line like Illinois that it was giving you no time to throw the ball and not adjusting. That's when I have a problem. I do not have a problem against ODU. So again, I like the play calling a lot more in this game. Were there some question marks? Wasn't too big of a fan when Cody Brown came in. I'm really, as you've been hearing on the podcast, if you've been reading what I wrote, I'm interested to see Cody Brown. I think he was a great pickup from University of Miami. He transferred in just before the season, this offseason. I think he's going to be a great back. But when you looked at how the game is, and this is my worry about when you do running backs by committee, because I've seen this before, is that sometimes you don't go with the hot hands. You might end that momentum. And I saw that a few times with other teams that try to use that. Xavier Brown was your hot hand at that moment. And you bring in Cody Brown and the timing was off and the plays were slow to develop. Well, Xavier Brown was the guy. Even Mike Hollins, I know he had, this was, Cody Brown came in the second half, and obviously Mike Hollins had his fumble earlier, and he had a special teams mishap. So I get why UVA possibly didn't want to use him more because of saying like, hey, we're going to have you step back here because of this, and this. But at the same time, you had Xavier Brown who was doing a great job. So in that case, that was one thing. I'm like, I'm not quite sure that I would have done that one. Or sometimes when you had some short yardage situations, I'm like, why would you bring in Paris Jones? Why wouldn't you bring in Xavier Brown, who has shown he's got great instincts? Or you bring Mike Hollins, who can bulldoze, or just, maybe do a jet sweep to Heaton Thompson because he's also a guy that can fight every single time and get you the yardage. So those little things, yes, I can still go, yeah, those are some play call, but that's very nitpicky when it comes to play calling. So the fumbles. So the first fumble would be the Mike Hollins one in the end zone. Got to hold on to the ball. That's simple as that. The second one was Brennan Armstrong. I believe that one was just before the end of the half when they got the ball back. That one was in midfield. And that one I understand the frustration. And that one is where you see what Tony Elliott is saying. He's saying to Brennan, listen, don't be a hero in every play. In that situation, he had already got the first down. So instead of trying to get for the extra yardage, I think it was about 3 or 4 extra yards, you don't need that. You got the first down, go out of bounds or slide. Those are type of decisions and game management decisions where Brennan still needs to improve. And that's something that Tony Elliott touched on. Sometimes Brennan wants to do too much, or sometimes Brennan is putting too much on himself. He's a competitor. You can say a lot of things about Brennan Armstrong as a quarterback, but as a athlete, he's a competitor. He's one of his harshest critics. You can hear it in the post-game comments. You can hear it when you talk to him before games. He is going to dissect everything that he does. And I think the one thing is he puts sometimes too much on his back. And I think in that point, he just needs to be aware of where he is, where the sticks are, where is the out of bounds. If he can get it to the out of bounds, no, then slide. I think that is something where I think he's going to get a little bit better. And I think you've seen a little bit of that, but it's not consistent enough. So I think So the offensive line, I already touched on, they did a better job keeping Brennan Armstrong safe. Obviously, those penalties were not the best. There was 2 penalties on the O-line, especially where they negated some first down opportunities. I talked about the snaps. So I'm going to end talking about the offense with one guy. Hold on a second. I'm going to remove the stats just for a second. And I am going to show my man, Xavier Brown. Let's go over here. Let's show this one right here. So if you are on YouTube, and again, I did a closer look, the rewatch with our Wahoo's 24/7 subscribers, and this GIF is also available there, so you get to see this film. It's the long run for Xavier Brown. Brennan Armstrong pitches it to Xavier Brown, and then Xavier finds a hole. He breaks a few tackles, stiff arms a dude, and then tries to kind of stiff arm another guy, but then is shoved out of bounds. He is a smart running back. We're going to talk about his instincts. We're going to talk about his speed. We're going to just talk about his awareness. But he's also a smart football player. Tony Elliott talked about football intelligence, and after the post game where he needs some of his players to step up, and that's something that he wants to do with his team. What Xavier Brown showed in this game, especially in the fourth quarter, you saw a running back that was smart. He was self-aware to know, just as before the ODU scoring drive, that you are trying to take time off the clock. And he was running with the ball, and instead of going out of bounds, he noticed where he was situationally on the field, and he slid down inside. So the clock kept going. So that was a huge awareness in where he was, what the situation in the game was. And that is from a first year. The other thing that I like about Xavier Brown is obviously we're showing the big run because it's a nice highlight. It's you see him stiff arm. But I think one of the best highlights for me when it comes to Xavier Brown is actually his 3-yard rush. Because as a running back, sometimes you're not going to be given anything. When he looked in that, he was given nothing. There was a chance for him to lose yardage in that play. But what he did was he saw something, and then he made a quick decision, great instincts, and with the space that he had, he made several cutbacks. He worked in such a tight space, and he still managed to get 3 yards. 3 good yards. He moved the ball. He didn't have a turnover. He didn't lose yardage. So I think that particular play shows how much he's going to develop and how big he's going to be on this defense eventually. So, all right. So we kind of broke down offensively. Overview. I like what I saw. Some improvements there. I'm not going to hail this as world beaters or the offense is back because, again, I'm looking at what the opponent is. I'm curious to see how they do against an AC opponent this week. But there were some sparks, some flashes. That was good. Again, you're hoping that last drive in that second half where they were able to secure a win is going to help this team move forward. So we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to drink some water. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the defense. So stick around. And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Finchley for Wahoo's 24/7. And we're recapping Virginia's win over ODU 16-14. And we talked about the offense. So we're going to move over and we're going to talk about the defense. The defense has been improving steadily week by week. And, we've talked about how the secondary has improved. And, in the game against ODU, we didn't have the full secondary. Antonio Clary, who had a stinger against Illinois. He's been dealing with a shoulder issue that we've known about since fall camp. So he wasn't available in the game. So we saw Cohen King come on. So this was his first opportunity to get some playing time. And although in the first drive, you saw a few chunks of big yardage by ODU, that was kind of expected because if you watch back film in the first 2 games, you saw how much Antonio Clary and the secondary really helps stop the run as well. And the communication between the safety and the linebacker is crucial. And that communication wasn't quite there yet in that first drive. They were still adjusting to Cohen King being there because, again, Darius Bratton is not fully healthy. We saw him towards the end of the game come on. So they were adjusting with that communication and seeing the field, and that communication wasn't quite as crisp as it was the other games, which is why you saw some more of those big chunks of yards that ODU had. But at the end of the day, ODU only rushed for 89 yards, so they were able to adjust to that. So ODU managed 324 yards of total offense in the game. They only scored 14 points from them, 235 yards passing. They were 4 to 15 on third down. So it was a good day defensively for Virginia. They had 11 possessions and they scored twice. That's good. So defensively, this defense continues to improve. Allie Jennings, who is going into this game, was the country's top receiver in yards, managed less than 100 yards receiving. He had 97 yards, 1 touchdown on 7 catches. He was targeted 10 times. And Zach Kuntz, a 6-footed tight end, that was a mismatch for Virginia in several ways. But he only managed 83 yards on 6 catches on 10 targets as well. He had 1 touchdown also. So they did well against the 2 biggest playmakers. Yes, everyone's going to see that poor Josh Ahern's mismatch against Kuntz. And Coach Rudd actually admitted after the game and said, it's probably not the best decision I've done. But kudos to Jalen Baker. He had a good one-on-one against Kuntz on 1. So kudos to Jalen Baker when he came in. He had a good win there. Let me bring up the stats again if you're on YouTube. So the defense, again, they did well against some of the biggest weapons against ODU. Let's look at some of the defensive stats before I dive in on the last drive, because that's what people are focusing on a lot of times, is because they remember the last drive and how ODU was able to march down the field when it comes to the defense. And it's a shame because when you look at the defensive stats, other defensive stats and how the pass rush was great. Again, in our prediction story, we said they were able to get the pass rush because I thought the matchup against the O-line against ODU was there for the taking because they allowed so many sacks prior to this game. So looking into the stats, you see that Langston Long, again, he had a very good game. That's the second game in a row that you can see Lex Long had a very good game. He led the team with 9 tackles. Anthony Johnson had 8. Nick Jackson had 8. Lex also had 1 tackle for a loss and 2 pass breakups. Anthony Johnson had 1. Nick Jackson had 2. So again, they had some they had a good consistent game. Jonas Sanker, there was one key stop that I remember where he came off the edge and he was able to I believe it was in the second quarter where he was able to stop a big, I think it was a big 4th down conversion. So again, Jonas Sanker again had a very good day. And then we had Chico Bennett and Cam Butler, both of them registering a sack. And I believe Jameer Carter also had a sack. Cam Butler, Chico Bennett, and Aaron Famui. It was Aaron Famui with the sack too. So they were able to get some pressure in there, and they were pretty good, pretty consistent. So I don't have anything bad to say. They won the matchups. They won their one-on-ones and was able to get to the quarterback, and they were able to keep ODU for less than 100 yards rushing. So the defense did well, especially up front. Now, the one thing that I wanted to touch on before we dive into that last drive a little more deeply is DeSean Perry. You've heard me talk about DeSean Perry, especially where I thought that they were using DeSean Perry in the wrong position last year. So he was more off the edge, and he was able to amass 4 tackles, 1 for a loss, and 2 solo. He had a really good game when he came on. When he was called into this in the second quarter, he was able to really show that he had the nose for the ball. And I think I'm going to just show one particular play. So let me remove this here and show one play where he had on Watson. So let me, here we go, share. So again, if you're on YouTube, I'm sharing one particular play by DeSean Perry. Again, if you're a Wahoo's 24/7 subscriber, This is also available on my closer look game recap. So if you're seeing this play out right here, you're seeing that DeSean Perry, in his role, he kind of stays close to the line of scrimmage rather than backing out. So what that allows is that he saw that the QB didn't keep the ball. So, and that the running back did. So he was able to come in and prevent Watson from cutting back. If he cut back, he could have gotten a lot more chunks of yards in that situation. But what having DeSean Perry there also helps is that because he was down there in line of scrimmage, that allows a guy like Nick Jackson to be there and fills the gap. So even if, let's say, DeSean Perry didn't get the tackle or didn't get enough on the running back, you would have Nick Jackson already there sealing the gap. So you wouldn't have this large seam for the running back to get through. So he played very well. I would expect him to come on a little bit more. I'm actually really happy to see that, not just because he's a South Florida native like me and a Gulliver Prep alumni, but I really, really liked seeing DeSean Perry out there. He deserves his moment, and he did really good. So I think one of the things in this game is that we saw a couple of flashes from new faces. You saw Xavier Brown on offense. You saw DeSean Perry on defense, but he also saw like Ethan Davies on punt return when neither Billy Camp, who was ill, and Antonio Clary, his backup, wasn't able to go. So you're asking Ethan Davis to go in, and he was consistent. He did a good job, and he was fielding punts. And by the end, he was more confident, and he actually fielded one. So that was good to see, and that's another option for Virginia moving forward. So let's go through that last drive. So I think one of the first things you have to touch on is that fourth down when there was 4th and 8, and the quarterback obviously found Kuntz, the 6'8" tight end. When you look in this drive, you're just going to have to put your hands up and say, ODU did a good job. Not only in execution, but the play calling was good. Not only did they manage to allow their quarterback to get more time throwing the ball, because if you look at how they set up, you know how before I was talking about how Virginia would have 2 tight ends or have Heaton Thompson up there in a way to help the O-line and give Brennan Armstrong more time? That's what ODU was doing. And they also said, you know what? We're going to have you, Wolf, Jennings, Kuntz. We're going to have you guys make plays. So we're going to allow you to beat your one-on-one matchups, which they did. But also what their coach did, which was very smart, and I hope Virginia uses this too, was that on one or two plays, you saw that Kuntz and Jennings were on the same side. So you're telling UVA's defense, you've got to cover both. And they did a good job of that. Is having your 2 best playmakers like that. Again, honestly, that last drive, you just got a hats off to ODU. Sometimes it's not about broken coverage or a missed tackle. Sometimes it's just the other team making plays, and ODU was making plays. Finally, Anthony Johnson's pass interference call. That was something that it was, I think, 4th and 18, and ODU was in a last-ditch effort to score. Wolf threw a long ball. Anthony Johnson grabbed Jennings, and it was called for PI. Honestly, I don't have a problem with it. Yes, Anthony Johnson is going to be frustrated at it, but that was a smart football move, because if he didn't hit Jennings, if he didn't hold on to Jennings would have caught that ball and gone for a touchdown. So at the end of the day, he gave his defense another chance to stop ODU. They didn't, but again, that was the right call. You can't knock AJ for that. I think when you look back on tape, and when he looks back on tape, yes, he's a perfectionist. He's a good football player. He's a competitor. He will not like that. But at the end of the day, it was either a PI call or a touchdown, because that's what it looked like. If he didn't hold on to Jennings was going to score. So overall, I think the defense did a good job. I'm curious to see how they handle Syracuse. And again, we're doing the game preview a little early this week on Wednesday, along with our takeaways from Tony Elliott's press conference. So I'm curious to see that matchup, the defense against Syracuse. Obviously, there's more reasons why we're curious on that side of the ball. So that's going to be a fun matchup. So again, we broke down everything from the offense to defense. We touched a little bit on special teams with some miscues. Obviously, Demick Sterling's kickoff return. he went for it, and it was really helped UVA. And honestly, Tony Elliott joked, was like, with time coming off the clock, maybe he wouldn't want to do it, but he knew from Starling's body language that he was going to do it, that he was going to come out and try for a big return. So again, I think this was a good game for Virginia overall. They left a lot of points. They still hurt themselves, and those are things that are fixable. And I'm curious to see how this translates to better competition. Again, like I said in the beginning of the show, there's a lot of good things, but I do not want to say everything is fixed, everything is glorious. This is going to be, they're going to win all the rest of the games or most of the games, and they're going to fight for the AC Coastal. That's not realistic. We show steady improvement. Now I want to see how this offense handles itself in a game where they have to make in-game adjustments. I want to see how they handle it when their first plan wasn't working. I want to see them against better competition and how they match up, especially on the defensive front. I want to see this O-line get tested before you make any big glaring assumption. But the good thing is they improved on offense. I think they got a little bit more confidence back from that last drive. And you're hoping that that's how they can build from that moving forward. So again, thank you so much for joining us this Monday, and we'll be back here on Wednesday. Like I just mentioned, we're combining 2 episodes in one since the game for Syracuse is on Friday night, and I will be traveling to Syracuse. So if you want to have coverage from Syracuse, and I'll have a lot of post-game coverage and game coverage from there starting on Friday. And then I will make sure to also have the game recap here, obviously, on Monday. So if you like what you're hearing, go ahead and subscribe to us on anywhere you listen to your podcast. But also, I would really appreciate if you go and review and rate us. It helps us get this show out a little bit more. And we'll be right back here on Wednesday. So hope you guys have a good rest of your Monday.